Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture, the show where we discuss science, technology and culture in its myriad of forms. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? You ready to trust the technology today?
Well, that's a good question. Are we going to get through it today, STC fans? I don't know. Well, if the technology holds up, for sure.
That's right. Well, before we get into discussing this fully, we almost didn't make it today because, both of us were hanging out waiting for each other to go online, at least based on what Skype was telling us, and it turned out we were both online and Skype was telling us different things, and the humble text message came to the rescue in the end.
That's right.
So, but that's a good example, and we'll discuss this in a bit more detail, but whenever you go to like this isn't a presentation, but we're producing a video, so you kind of have this doubt every single time that you start doing one of these things that, like, part of my brain is thinking, is this recording properly? Is the sound going through correctly? Is the iPhone capturing my image okay? Is Skype going to hold up so you don't pixelate and die and drop out? You know, it's only a 15-minute video we got going, but, anything can happen in those 15 minutes.
Well, that's right. But I think this nervousness, particularly when it comes to a presentation, is due to the fact that we lived through the pre-Windows 7 era. So, you never knew if your presentation was going to work, if your laptop or desktop wasn't going to crash. And like you say, the early days of Skype, even, you could get dropouts and all sorts of problem with bandwidth. So I think for some of us, maybe the kids of today who just pick up an iPad and FaceTime and it always works, is a different experience to what we've lived through.
Well, that's the interesting experience here, and that with the generations of technology and computers that have come through, and as we were talking about before we got on, I've picked up the new Apple TV, and while you could argue that, it does obviously work better, and but the fundamentals are still really the same as the old one. It does have the App Store, obviously, which gives you a lot more functions and whatnot. But for me, the major difference between both devices, they both do the same thing, but the reality is that the new one, you have no feeling that it's not going to work, whereas the old one would, it would stumble, it would buffer, it would, even if your internet speed was going well, it would still do these things. And, or even if you're like drawing video from, say, your home server. So in my case, if I've got a Mac running and it's connected to local video files and I want to run it there, sometimes that didn't work properly as well. And that's what you get when you get subsequent generations of technology coming through. I don't ever really think about any of my computers, phones, tablets, whatever I'm using. I don't ever consider them not to work these days. Whereas I can clearly remember back in the good old days of especially the 90s and probably, up to the late 2000s, I would always have to fix something. Especially with a desktop PC, etc.
Well, especially in the early days of video editing at home. I mean, Apple's much better than, say, Windows, but, even then, your Apple Mac would still crash and you wouldn't know if that render would go through properly, or there'd be some problem with some peripheral or something like that. And, they were nerve-wracking times, especially when you had to dump something back to tape and, you didn't know if your machine could do it.
I can clearly recall, I guess it was, 13 years ago now, the Guardian, when we were doing that, and the feature film, and the computer I was using didn't have enough storage on it to do basically an edit timeline that would capture the whole project, which was 100 minutes at the time. So I had to do each individual scene, finalize that, and then put it back into the timeline, which was just painful. And then there was the process of getting it onto tape, because it was DV back in those days, which was the only real way to do it properly with the equipment that we had. And because it was tape, even though it should be perfect. You might get some digital artifacts propping up in there, and that sort of irritated me at this final screening we did in the cinema, because that was a big unknown as well. Doing a digital projection back then was like unheard of. Yeah. And I had the tape player in there, and it did the job. Thankfully, we got through it, but there were 3 or 4 moments in there where I saw the pixelation come out because of an error on the tape, and it just, nobody probably cared. Like, they probably thought it was like a cigarette burn, and like from a film projection, they probably didn't notice. But when you're seeing something for that long, you notice it straight away, and it just irritates you, and you just want to get through it.
Oh, that's right. But those days are gone. Now you pick up an iPad and it works. You put video into your PC or into your Mac and it works. You really don't see the crashes that you used to.
Yeah, exactly. Gizmodo had an interesting article about titled "Why We Don't Fully Trust Technology," and to cut a long story short, their argument was that the more complex the technology becomes, the less we're likely to trust it. So, for instance, we don't. Sort of, in a way. There's an example that they use where it's actually a complex piece of technology, but we'll get to that one in a minute. So, for instance, you don't really question whether your dishwasher works. You don't question whether your washing machine doesn't work. You don't question whether your toaster doesn't work. That's because in simple terms, they're simple devices. They only do one thing. And if anything, it's more like a mechanical appliance, even if there is some sort of small chip running it or something like that. Whereas a computer is actually a very complex machine, a complex piece of technology, and a million things could go wrong with it. And in the good old days, it used to be the blue screen of death in Windows, and Macs didn't, I don't think, suffered from that so much.
Still used to get the whirling little wheel.
Yep, the spinning wheel of death.
Spinning wheel of death.
So, and that's where that was where they were coming from in terms of a thesis, I guess, around that. And that might be fair enough, I think, because you're worried with a technology that's got so many parts to it. It is possible that the more parts there is, the more chance that one of those things goes wrong.
Well, that's right. But it's interesting that behind this now, there are chips in our washing machines, in our fridges, in our toasters. And we might talk about this a bit more, but in the connectivity of the internet and the Internet of Things, someone can manipulate your trusty washing machine, maybe not to wash properly, maybe not to work at all, maybe to say bad things about you to the fridge. While these devices have been, I guess, individual, that's been one thing. And now we've got faith in each one of these, whether it's our laptop. Now these days it's pretty hard to get a bad laptop.
Yeah,
it's pretty hard even to get a bad phone, even if you're using Android. Functionally, they're still pretty good.
Yeah,
you can almost do normal things like you can on an iPhone with those. So you've got all of this level now, but that level's being lifted another by the Internet of Things, the connectivity, the fact that driverless cars can exist, and we try to put our trust in them, or we will be putting our trust in them shortly. You have privacy concerns and also hacking concerns. So I don't know if that now will be the next level to our trust of these devices.
I'd say that's probably where it's going to be, because from a functional standpoint, they're rapidly getting to the point where, they're like not flawless, but pretty close to flawless from a functional perspective. But yeah, like you said, from a privacy concern point of view, I think there's actually that growing movement of people that do think a lot more about what's happening when they use these things and they're connected to the cloud and to the internet. People I work with who I would definitely not call computer savvy, they're saying things like, I don't use Google Chrome because I don't want everything I type into that thing to be showing up. Because they said I used it for a couple of months, and then I started seeing related searches in ads popping up on pages based on what I was searching, and they said that's enough. And these are people that have no idea really about technology. So
it's interesting.
So it is there.
Because there have been warnings about voice-controlled operation of Google Chrome, of Samsung TVs.
Yeah.
Potentially, if your washers or all your utilities in the house, your lights and, everything else are controlled by voice command, then technically you can be listened into, whatever you say. So this opens a whole new world of trust in your devices. I think there's an interesting thing to look at as well is 10 years ago, people were still a little bit nervous about financial transactions online, particularly, credit cards. But the fear there was someone get your card and take your money. Today, though, really that's not an issue anymore. But what is an issue is people getting your data or your personal information that's attached to that card. So that's shifted as well. That trust level has shifted. And, of course, with the breaches now that we've seen from retail institutions, financial institutions, and let's call them loosely leisure institutions, that data is out there. So once again, I think there's a trust issue there as well. And I think we're seeing a merger now between what we would talk about in terms of, trusting your laptop or your desktop and the devices you're using.
Yeah.
The information there and the connectivity, and I think that there is a rising feeling amongst people that you can be tracked more easily. So while your PowerPoint presentation is likely to work, except when you need it most, I was in a meeting the other day where someone had a big presentation.
The whole thing went down.
So but I think that trust issue now is moving to different levels.
Absolutely. I guess finally too, maybe it's, and this is something we mentioned just before we got on too, is about the fact that the generations coming through now maybe don't think about these things as much as what we do, perhaps, because we went through an era where things didn't work that well and, slowly improved. We saw the beginnings of all of this stuff. And whereas the post-2000 generation probably have no conception of how that world was like, they see all of these things like Facebook, Twitter, and Google and all of those things as just being part of the norm, and they don't really think about the implications of anything.
I agree, and I think very loosely it's analogous to, say, the car. So 50 years ago, you needed roadside assistance because, just jumping in and going for a drive in your car wasn't guaranteed you'd get there. Reliability was just a car that didn't break down all the time. Whereas today we're spoiled. Most cars are actually pretty good.
Yeah.
You don't see too many people, broken down on the side of the road. And I wonder, that's kind of where we're going now with computers. You don't see anyone with a device that actually struggles to have the processing power to do whatever it is we're doing with our devices today. In fact, we don't even ask the question most of the time. So, we are spoiled, and that probably does mean that, for today's generation, they can't ever imagine struggling with Windows 95 or 98 or a beige, box that crashes every time, you load up its, 500 megahertz processor.
The true test will be when the entire network goes down and there's no ability to connect to the internet for a certain period of time while they're trying to fix it. Will they curl up into a ball into the fetal position and get withdrawal symptoms because it doesn't work? Will they have, or is it like the Simpsons episode where they had to go and play outside when the TV got shut off? Who knows?
But maybe you've hit on it there, that the key is that, the breakdowns in the future will be lack of connectivity. Yeah. So when you can't use your voice command or you can't Google to find out how to fix one of your tech devices, Yeah, that's a real issue.
That's where those handy paper manuals were there.
Having said that, we really do put too much faith, I think, in our modems and wireless routers around the home, because they just seem to work. And yet if they go down, you're in real trouble.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. So thanks again for that. Fascinating topic. And I think we've almost made it through the episode, trusting our technology here. All right. So don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. That has all of our links and content. Feel free to interact with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. I'd love to hear from you. And if you think anyone's interested in these frequent discussions that we have in science, technology, and culture, then feel free to point them to our website. We'd greatly appreciate that. All right. So that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.